Good evening. 안녕하세요. I remember several years ago, I was at a bus stop near Wangsimni, and some high school boys came up to me wanting to practice their English. As these poor boys opened their mouths, all they could say was, "Hello, I like kimchi. I love you," and walked away giggling and embarrassed. Oh, 이상해. Sadly, these boys have studied English for many years, but all they could say were a few awkward phrases, and they didn't know it's not appropriate to say, "I love you" to a stranger. But so often I hear about how Koreans spend so much time, so much effort, so much money on learning English, but they don't seem to get very good results. They don't really know how to use it to communicate or use it practically after so much trouble. One problem is, I would say, Koreans often are not really learning English. They are merely learning facts about English. They are learning book knowledge that they can't use. And also this English has become an obsession, such an obsession that it has become a bondage, a slavery, a prison. And this discourages Koreans from really learning English, and it prevents them from really being able to use it effectively. So I'm going to talk about some of the challenges you face. I'll talk about some myths or misconceptions. I will talk about motivation problems, and I will talk about steps to finding freedom. First, some challenges. You face some real psychological and linguistic challenges with English. English is hard because the two languages are so different. It's hard to learn a language as an adult, and you don't get exposed to much English outside of non-natural environments like classrooms. But another big challenge is what I will call mental efficiency. Mental efficiency. You see, when you do stuff in your first language, your brain automatically understands most everything without effort. But in a second language, a foreign language, it's not automatic. Your brain has to work really hard to understand everything, the grammar and the vocabulary and everything else. And so whenever you do anything in English, it's hard, it's mentally tiring, you don't understand very well. It takes a lot of time and effort to get your brain more comfortable and used to English. To develop this mental efficiency takes a lot of time and work. Those are some of the challenges. Some myths. You might think that intelligent people can learn languages easily, right? No, not necessarily. You see, smart people can have all kinds of fears and inhibitions, motivation problems that keep them from learning English. If you have the right kind of motivation and if you're willing to practice, then you can learn English even if you're not the smartest. A lot of people think that a lot of memorizing and repetition, traditional classroom activities will help them learn. Not so. It's just learning facts about English, and it doesn't develop that mental efficiency. And in order to learn words, you need to encounter them in real context. Reading or listening to help you learn them, to know how the words are really used, and to have a context to help you remember them. Otherwise, you forget. People think grammar is a bunch of boring mechanical rules to memorize. That's not true. Grammar is a set of patterns that actually have meaning, although often abstract meanings like A and V and the perfect tense. Rather than memorizing grammar rules, you need to learn grammar in real context so you see how it's used. A lot of people focus on tests, learning English for tests, 수능, TOEFL, TOEIC, or for good grades. This is just boring. It ruins your motivation, and it's just learning facts about English. So let's talk about motivation. Maybe you think, if I just had more motivation, I can learn English. Right? Not necessarily. It's not so much how much motivation, but it's the type of motivation. There are different types of motivation, and some can actually be harmful and self-defeating and can hinder your English learning. Motivation falls into two psychological categories. There is internal and external motivation. External motivation means you do it because you have to. The motivation is really from outside of you. Although maybe you have kind of adopted it, your heart is not really into it. Motivation due to a sense of pressure or obligation, pressure to get good grades, pressure to get good test scores, pressure from parents and family and school or the workplace, social expectations like Tina, or unrealistic expectations that you put on yourself, what we call perfectionism, 완벽주의. It's actually not very good because these kinds of motivations lead to this. They cause you to focus on how people think about you or what you think about yourself rather than really learning English, practical English. This leads to bad study habits like rote, mechanical memorization. And it's just learning facts about English. And English is no longer a language, but a bondage. On the other hand, internal motivation means you really want to learn it. And it usually includes the following kinds of things. One is a psychological free will, a sort of psychological free will. You choose to learn English because you want to, you desire to do so. There is no sense of obligation or pressure. These kinds of people are the most successful language learners. Also, people with internal motivation are motivated because they feel that they are growing. They realize that they are learning, and this makes them feel better. You get a sense of satisfaction from learning something, a sense of growth. This makes you feel better about yourself. This feeds your self-confidence and self-esteem. Third, some people also get a sort of social motivation from learning something. From the process of learning, they develop social connections, which makes them feel better. Or because they can communicate with other people in English and develop relationships. That social, relational kind of motivation. Like I said, this is the most successful kind of motivation. But maybe it's not reasonable to expect you to fall in love with English. And that's okay. You don't have to love everything that you study. But that's okay because there is a kind of motivation that's kind of in between. It's an external motivation, but it's not as bad as the other external motivations. In some ways, it's like internal motivation. It's called a personal utility motivation, which means maybe you don't love English, but you don't mind learning it because you see that it's important and useful to you, it's worthwhile. Maybe it's important to your study goals or your career goals, and you learn it for that reason, as a tool, not because you feel obligation or pressure. Personal utility motivation. If you can forget the other external pressures and obligations, forget that. If you could just embrace English as a tool, as a personal utility, that might be the first step to freedom, because you get rid of the sense of obligation and motivation. And for some people, if they stay with it long enough, maybe this personal utility motivation might evolve over time into an internal motivation. So that can be the first step to freedom. So let me talk about other steps to freedom. I'm going to talk about finding your goals. I'll talk about finding better learning or study strategies. And 3, finding a sense of self-confidence. So number 1, your goals. Why are you learning English? What's your motivation? Forget perfectionistic attitudes and goals. In fact, it's not realistic to try to be perfect in English. English is just a tool, and embrace it as a tool. So renounce all of those obligations or pressures that others have imposed upon you. Declare to yourself, declare that you don't care what other people think. You don't care about those other pressures or obligations. You don't care about the social expectations. You don't care about the umchina. You don't care about what people think of your English ability. You just want to learn English as a tool, as something that is useful to you, and as something that maybe can be perhaps even interesting or perhaps enjoyable. Second, finding better learning strategies. You need to find learning strategies that will make learning more interesting, more motivating, and that will develop that mental efficiency. You see, it takes a lot of time, a lot of exposure, a lot of input in a language to develop that mental efficiency. It takes thousands and thousands of hours to do that, and there is no simple shortcut. That's the bad news. The good news is you can do a lot of this on your own. You don't necessarily have to take Hagwon classes. One of the best things you can do is a lot of reading. And it's important to find reading materials that are interesting to you, or at least useful and informative. Otherwise, you can't really stay motivated. One kind is intensive reading. This is kind of like what you do in a reading class, except you can do this on your own. You don't have to take a class. It's simply intensively reading to understand. For example, you read through a text once to get the main idea, read through again, try to guess the meanings of new words from context. Then you look up words you can't guess. Then you read through a couple more times for full understanding. Even better, more important, is also a lot of extensive reading. This means reading a lot of materials, different kinds of materials, not necessarily trying to understand everything. This can be the best way to develop your vocabulary by learning words from context and to develop that mental efficiency. Find different materials that you like, that you enjoy, from popular to academic. Things like popular novels, comics, online news, popular books, academic materials. Whatever you like, read as much as you can. Likewise, use media materials. A lot of free audio and video materials, like on the internet, like TED.com and YouTube and whatever. Listen extensively and sometimes listen intensively. And sometimes you can also repeat after, follow along, and imitate speakers in the videos for speaking practice on your own. For vocabulary, don't try to over-memorize. Just learn words that you are likely to use or encounter in reading or listening. When it comes to memorizing, make your work more efficient. Take some time first to learn memory aids, memory tricks, mnemonics. There are materials out there that can show you how to do this. Fun ways to learn vocabulary and other things. Word associations, visual associations, clever, cute, fun ways to help you remember things more easily. Maybe think in English. Make yourself think in English sometimes. This is a way of giving your brain some input, some exposure to develop that mental efficiency. I've used this for learning languages. Third, confidence. Developing your confidence. How can you develop your confidence? Well, first, learn on your own. Don't go to so many Hagwon classes. Learn on your own. Empower yourself as a learner. Find materials that you like. Study by yourself or with friends. Next, maybe teach your kids English. Yes, teach your kids English. This is because you can learn from teaching. And, well, yeah, if you don't have kids, find some. You can find some somewhere. Because you can learn from teaching, and from teaching you can develop your self-confidence. It's okay if your English sounds like Konglish, because your kids can get some accurate input from media, and they will probably be okay then. You see, people have forgotten language is for communication and for social interaction. Now, your kids need some things for their intellectual and cognitive development. They need social interaction and play with their friends. More importantly, they need love and social interaction from parents. So instead of sending them to Hagwon so often, spend time with them at home. Spend quality time with them at home. Teach them some English. read English books to them, teach them how to learn on their own also. Because not only will this help you learn and develop your confidence, but this will help your children's sense of confidence. They will get more confidence from spending time with you, and years later, they will thank you for it. In conclusion, I kind of know how you feel. I kind of feel your pain, because I am now just starting to find my freedom from Korean. For you, English doesn't need to be a bondage. It doesn't need to be a burden or a prison. It's a language, not a bondage. It's a tool that you can learn to use for your own purposes. So I hope that you can find your motivation again. I hope that you can learn to enjoy English and that you can do well in English. And I hope that you can find your freedom from English. So thank you. God bless.